So good morning. This morning I'm going to announce our recommended 2015 recommended budget. I want to take a few minutes at the beginning and provide a context for this budget, kind of give you the high points, and then be happy to answer any questions you have. I think I can do this in about 13 minutes, which is a little better than $1 billion a minute, so it'll be a very efficient presentation. First, the context. As you know, 2 years ago, our state was facing a $3.5 billion budget deficit, one of the largest per capita deficits in the nation. We had high unemployment, we had a divided legislature, and I think a very uncertain future. We're in a much better place today than we were 2 years ago. We have created, according to the Oregon Business Plan, nearly 40,000 jobs. Our unemployment rate has dropped from 10.6 down to 8.6. But having said that, we still have a long ways to go. Many of those jobs did not pay a living wage. The recovery has been very spotty. There are still many places around our state that have double-digit unemployment, certainly within our communities of color. Still, we're in a much better place than we were 2 years ago, and I think the budget reflects that. Most significantly, we've taken a $3.5 billion revenue shortfall in the last biennium, and we're coming into this biennium with about a $30 million revenue surplus. So it's not a lot, but it is a very significant change over 2 years, and most importantly, with the exception of health care, and I'll come back to that in a moment, we have squeezed most of the one-time revenue out of this budget. So we're presenting a budget that is based on real revenues, meaning that as the economy grows, these dollars can be invested into programs and into Oregon's recovery. This budget is built around a series of high-leverage investments designed to rebuild a strong middle class and to ensure sustainable economic opportunity for all Oregonians. This should not be viewed as a two-year budget, but as the foundation for a strategic and intentional investment plan over the next decade. The primary priorities are putting children and education first, investing in jobs and innovation, and reducing the cost of government. And this recommended budget reflects those priorities. First and foremost, this is an education budget. In the last 2 years, we have made a lot of progress in this state, creating a unified, integrated education system for early childhood through post-secondary education and training. We've had incredible support from our partners in the education community who have managed to hold this system apart under extraordinary circumstances. Over 3,000 teachers lost in the last few years. And in spite of that, we've created the Oregon Education Investment Board. We've redesigned our early childhood service system. We've rethought our governance structure. We've got achievement compacts in place. We've escaped from the No Child Left Behind law. This is a huge accomplishment, moving from 3.5 in the red to 30 million in the black, but 30 million is not exactly a reinvestment budget. So we've taken some steps in this budget, some actions to try to create space for the kind of reinvestment, some in the short term, a lot in the long term, that's going to put this state back on its feet again. In the long term, we clearly need sustainable and a thoughtful reevaluation of the state's system of public finance. That's going to take time. It requires discipline. It requires a strategic approach. And everything in this budget is designed to set the stage for a discussion of long-term revenue reform a couple years down the road, and I'll revisit that in just a moment. Secondly, excuse me, we've sought to reduce the cost of health care and the cost of corrections in order to free up dollars to reinvest on the front end. We have sought to reduce some of the cost drivers that are diverting resources from the classroom, in particular the proposal to put a cap on the cost of living adjustment in the public employee retirement system. And we are going to take a serious look at tax expenditures. This is a report that's been coming out every biennium since 1995, and we're going to really take a hard look to see if we can get some additional resources for reinvestment in public services and in education through changing some of the tax expenditures. This budget includes $8 billion for the enterprise of education, and all of that is built on the foundation of early childhood. This budget completes the realignment of early childhood programs to ensure that all kids have the preschool and nutrition and health programs necessary to ensure that they're ready to learn when they get to kindergarten. We have a kindergarten readiness assessment that will be piloted in 2013 and will begin to give us feedback to guide on how well those investments are doing. We've increased Oregon Pre-K by $2.2 million. We've doubled the amount of resources in our relief nurseries. We've backfilled the one-time money in the employment-rated daycare program and made a modest increase from $8,500 to $9,000. And we've invested $21 million in early intervention and special education. In total, about a $48 million increase in resources to the early childhood space. In K through 12, we've appropriated $6.15 billion to the state school fund and assumed that $253 million in cost reductions will result for school districts from the changes in the public employee retirement system. That nets $6.4 billion in purchasing power, enough to hire an additional 500 teachers. But more importantly, this is the first time since 2007 that we've had a K through 12 budget that is at or above current service level without one-time resources. And I can't overemphasize the importance of that. We have patched our educational budgets together with one-time resources, which is one of the things that creates the up and down and the instability. It is a big deal to have a budget that's based on real revenue, particularly for something as important as the enterprise of education. We also have a package of strategic investments, starting with an effort to ramp up investment in professional development. No state or nation that has significantly increased student performance has done so without a significant investment in the teaching force and the professionals who work in the classroom. We propose to use up to $120 million from the 4.5% of the Common School Fund that goes to ESDs, up to $120 million, to set up regional centers for professional development to make that investment, that important investment in our teachers. We also are investing in third grade reading. We are investing in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math to better connect our students to the workforce, and we're investing in counselors and making it easier for kids to earn college credit while still in high school, to better connect kids in our K through 12 system to post-secondary education. Now, there's a relationship between these strategic investments and our long-term goal of reforming our system of public finance. We believe that by taking a small portion of our educational budget and investing it in areas that don't just sustain but actually transform the system, we can demonstrate that those targeted high-leverage investments actually produce tangible, measurable improvements in student performance and will lead to more investments and so forth. And I think that two things are necessary if we're going to have a conversation with Oregon voters about reinvesting in education by restructuring our tax system. The first thing is they need to know that those dollars are going to go into the classroom. And secondly, they need to know that those dollars are actually going to produce tangible results. So this is a key element in the larger strategy to really reinvest in education and have another look at our tax system. In post-secondary education, we have funded community colleges and the university system with about a 7 to 8% increase, which again should be viewed as a down payment on this longer-term reinvestment strategy, and hopefully will hold tuition in check. We've increased opportunity grants by over 14%, adding another $14.3 million for a total of $114 million. We strongly believe in tuition equity. I will support an effort to ensure that every qualified high school graduate in the state of Oregon can have access to those opportunity grants regardless of their immigration status. We have $275 million in our capital construction budget for a building on community college and university campuses. This does include resources for the Oregon State University Cascade campus in Bend. You will see that this is a lump sum, and we have asked the community colleges and the universities to look at their recommended or their proposed capital construction projects through the lens of 40-40-20 to make sure that if we're going to invest $275 million in capital construction, it moves us towards our capacity and our outcome objectives for education. Let me talk just a minute then about the steps we've taken in this budget to create space for moving dollars from the back end to the front end. As you recall, 2 years ago, I identified in my inaugural address a disturbing trend of disinvestment in our general fund, where we were spending more and more of the money we do have on health care, on corrections, on the human consequences of neglect and abuse and addiction. And we are taking dollars out of investments in children and families and education in order to do so. We need to turn that around. So a couple of these areas here are directly related to changing that pattern of investment. The first one is health care. This is the one area in the budget that still has a lot of one-time resources. It was propped up with a huge amount of stimulus money. And so we are proposing to extend the hospital tax for this next biennium as we transition to a new delivery model. Plus general fund and resources from the federal government that were granted under our waiver will allow us to fully fund the Oregon Health Plan for both years of the biennium. But in the first year, it will be funded at a 4.4% inflation rate, which is about 1% lower than we have right now. And in the second year of the biennium, at a 3.4% inflation rate going forward. That reduction in the growth of medical inflation will save about $11 billion in total funds over the next biennium, the next decade. It'll save $100 million in this biennium general fund. It'll save $175 million in general fund in the 15-17 biennium and $400 million in general fund in the 17-19 biennium. In other words, the delta that opens up in our budget by reducing the cost of health care is extraordinarily significant 2 or 3 years down the road in terms of our ability to accelerate the reinvestment in our system of public education. Secondly, in the area of public safety, our prison forecast, which has been plus or minus 1% accurate over the last 20 years, projects an increase of 2,300 beds over the next decade, most of which will be filled by nonviolent offenders. We have had a tremendously successful criminal justice system in the past, both in terms of recidivism rates and the number of violent offenders and people who really need to be locked up using those high security, high cost beds. But we're at an inflection point. And so this budget is built on the assumption and the policy direction, actually, that we're planning to hold our beds constant in the Oregon Department of Corrections at 14,600. We have about 14,300 right now. We'll let that grow a bit during this biennium until we take action. But the idea is to hold that flat going forward, which avoids $600 million in capital construction costs in our prisons, as well as the associated operational costs. Of those beds, the 2,300 beds projected, 800 would come in this biennium. That would force us to open the minimum security facility at Oregon State Prison and open the Deer Ridge facility. Our proposal is to seek alternative ways to sanction nonviolent offenders. We're not talking about anybody who's locked up now. We're not talking about letting anybody out. We're not talking about shortening sentences, but looking at more creative ways to manage the nonviolent offenders. We're waiting with anticipation for recommendations from Oregon's Public Safety Commission, but we've also reinvested in this budget $40 million on the front end in community corrections, for sheriffs, for drug and alcohol and community mental health, so that we can actually provide the resources to our local public safety partners to manage nonviolent offenders in other venues besides acute care prisons, and also to really put dollars in preventing people from getting into the criminal justice system in the first place. The third area is the area of trying to reduce the cost drivers that divert resources from the classroom. And here is the basic problem, and it's really an arithmetic problem. We will see an increase in our school districts of $1,000 per student over the next biennium. Of that $1,000 increase, about $500 is from PERS increases, about $300 is salary, and about $130 are other benefits. So almost all of that $1,000 increase will be eaten up, leaving almost nothing left to reinvest in the classroom. For that expenditure, which is about $600 million throughout the primary and secondary school system, we won't see a reduction in average class size. We won't see hiring additional teachers. We won't see buying back programs like the arts or vocational studies. So I want to make it really clear that this is not about the value of our public school teachers or our public employees or our classified school employees. And it's not about revamping a retirement system that, in balance, remains one of the best funded in the nation. It's essentially trying to figure out a way to balance the cost of our retirement system with our ability to put dollars in the classroom today to ensure that our students are successful tomorrow. I believe this accomplishes that. It will also reduce the unfunded actuarial liability by about 25%. So it also makes the retirement system much more stable. Let me just give you also just one more bit of detail on that. Essentially, we're not getting rid of the cost of living adjustment. This proposal would cap it at basically $480. So 55% of retirees would see no change. They would still get a 2% cost of living adjustment. 75% of retirees would get at least a 1% cost of living adjustment. So again, I want to make sure we cast this. This is not, again, about the value of quality or the hard work of our employees in the public sector. It's trying to address a common problem to create a more sound and stable retirement system, and also invest in programs like education and like social service programs that are critical to a thriving and sustainable economy tomorrow. Finally, this is a budget that invests heavily in jobs and innovation, directly addressing the immediate challenge of creating new jobs, but also positioning Oregon to be more competitive in a global economy tomorrow. The budget contains over $1 billion in capital construction infrastructure projects, from lottery and general obligation bonds, including a significant increase in Connect Oregon. As I mentioned, new capital construction projects for community colleges and universities, seismic upgrades, air, marine, and rail investments, technology, infrastructure improvements. And it also contains $450 million of other bond capacity for the I-5 bridge. We intend to work with the legislature to gain the necessary revenue to service those bonds and move forward with the Columbia River crossing. This budget also follows through on my commitment to support the local and regional economic development priorities established through our regional solutions committees. It includes resources to work in Eastern Oregon on the project to expand irrigated agriculture with water from the Umatilla and the Columbia River while enhancing fish runs. It has resources to support scaling up the East Side Forest collaboratives that are putting people back to work in federal forests through forest restoration. We maintain some small capacity to continue our work on trying to unbundle the O&C challenge in Southwest Oregon. We also double down on public-private partnerships like the Oregon Innovation Council. We've increased it to a $25 million appropriation. It funds our 3 signature research centers, as well as university-based innovations dedicated to agriculture and forestry resource. These new partnerships are accelerating the emergence of the clean innovation economy that we're seeing growing in Oregon, which is built on our natural strengths, our strong base in agriculture and forestry and advanced manufacturing industries, our promising research and development and commercialization opportunities, and our strategic location on the Pacific Rim with access to burgeoning Asian markets. Oregon Inc. Has created, for example, 26 new companies over the last 5 years, including everything from the next generation of water purification systems to mobile renal dialysis machines, and has captured hundreds of millions of dollars in private capital and federal grants with a huge return for a very modest investment of public resources. We also include $5 million in this budget as seed capital for the Oregon Investment Act to address the whole issue of access to capital. And we have added 3 FTE to essentially implement the regulatory streamlining program report that was produced by Fred Granum from the Department of Justice to begin to move out into these regional solution centers the process of permitting and making those centers sort of the ombudsman to speed up the permitting process for our businesses. Finally, and very importantly, this budget supports the Oregon Business Plan in its commitment to raise per capita income back up above the national average by 2020 and to reduce poverty to 10% by 2020. That requires that working families keep more of what they earn and have the opportunity to actually move up the income ladder. So this budget includes, as I said, an increase in the ERD, in the employment-related daycare program, and also a 30% increase in the earned income tax credit. Both of these are proven programs that actually help us meet our obligation and really our commitment to move more families from poverty to prosperity. We also have a significant investment in revamping the Oregon workforce system to make it a system that's much more nimble and efficient and focused on the job creation opportunities and needs of the 21st century. So in short, this is an excellent budget. I think that we would love to have more resources, but I think if you put this in the context of where we came from 2 years ago, from $3.5 billion in the hole to a balanced budget that is now the foundation for a very real and significant reinvestment strategy. And if you view this not as just a 2-year budget, but the foundation for the kinds of investments that will put us on the path to an enduring prosperity, I'm very, very satisfied with the proposal that I'll be taking to the legislature. Thank you.
Governor, it's one thing, as you know, to propose a budget, it's another for the legislature to approve it. Do you think the will is there, the political will is there for the legislature to take leaps in terms of both PERS and sentencing law?
I believe that the will is there. Obviously, these are difficult and controversial issues. I think the challenge is to make sure that this is a conversation between the executive branch and the legislature, between Republicans and Democrats, and with the people of Oregon about how we move our state forward. If we view this as little isolated pieces and in silos, the politics get a little dicey. But I think we demonstrated, and this legislature demonstrated over the last 2 years, that they have the capacity to address difficult problems in a bipartisan way and with civility, keeping the people's interest in mind, and I predict that that will happen again.
Have you dropped your interest in trying to change the 6% pickup aspect of PERS, or is that going to be a separate issue?
No, I still, well, it's obviously an issue on the table for collective bargaining. I still believe that the system would be better if we had the flexibility to bargain anywhere between 0 and 6% rather than 0 or 6%, and we'll be putting in the same bill we put in last session to address that. That is not, the passage of that bill is not key to this budget package, but it's an issue that I've been fairly straightforward on in the past.
What sort of possible revenue do you have in mind to pay for the I-5 bridge bonds that you said you'd be talking to the legislature?
This is ultimately a legislative decision, and I will work with them and support them on getting the support necessary. It could range from registration and license fee increases to a whole host of other things. You're looking for about $36 million a year in capacity, and I'm actually pretty agnostic on how we do it. There's a couple things that I would probably argue against. One would be I would actually vigorously against trying to use this with used lottery and geo-bonding capacity for this. I think that's for a different purpose. But I had a very good meeting with the bipartisan legislative leadership last week, and I'm sure we'll come to some conclusion. I also have spoken to Governor Gregoire, who will include in her proposed budget that Governor-elect Inslee will take over a funding package for the Columbia River Bridge.
Keeping the prisons at 14,600 inmates, the forecast shows that we're likely to hit that number around October, November. What sort of sentencing reforms would you need to actually achieve that, and is that a realistic target given the time?
I think it's a very realistic target. I'm not going to second guess the recommendations of the Public Safety Commission, and I'm not wed to any particular approach. But if you look at the data and the evidence across the nation, most states are trending in the other direction. They're actually seeing a reduction in their prison population. They've closed a prison in Texas, which is not exactly the bastion of a liberal lens on public safety. And so basically let me do an analogy. If I was still practicing medicine and I ignored the evidence and the data about the practice of medicine, I would be practicing, it would be malpractice. I think the same is true of our public safety system. There is robust information and hard data about the kinds of things that actually keeps people out of prison. And again, we're not talking about violent offenders, we're not talking about sex offenders, we're talking about that group of people, nonviolent offenders, and I think there's a whole host of ways this can be done, and it's just something we have to take on. I mean, the real question cannot be isolated as a conversation about public safety alone. You can identify kids on the front end who are going to end up in prison when they're very, very young. There's a set of very well-recognized risk factors. We know how to address them, and if we're serious about expanding the investment in education, that everyone who cares about education in this state, everyone who cares about a robust and compassionate safety net in this state should be equally concerned about addressing this issue in public safety. It's not just a public safety issue. It's giving us the ability to invest in families and in children and in a strong economy going forward.
Governor, speaking of malpractice in medicine, How confident are you that you can achieve the cost savings? Hospitals, particularly Salem Hospital, are reporting financial issues. We're having difficulty getting enough doctors to go into primary care. What evidence do you have that your reforms are working and that they will work?
Well, first of all, the coordinated care organizations have been operational, I think, 120 days, so it might be a little too soon to leap to a conclusion. But the fact is, we have 15 of them operating around the state. And essentially, it's 15 different experiments on how you change the business model to produce better value per unit. In Douglas County, they're doing some remarkable things with connecting mental health and getting mental health providers as a part of the primary care medical home. In Portland, they're looking at hiring community health workers to manage people with chronic conditions in their home. In Bend, they're developing complex care clinics to identify that 20% of the population that drives 70% of the cost. So it is too early to say, but I think we're on the right track. And again, it's remarkable that we find ourselves here after the very acrimonious debate about health care in the presidential election. We didn't have that here, and I think this is extraordinarily promising.
A follow-up on that, though, even as governor, you can't just issue by fiat what the inflation rate's going to be. If general healthcare inflation is much higher than the ones that you're setting your budget on, who gets squeezed? Who makes up that difference?
Well, a couple of points on that. First of all, 3.4% inflation rate is doable if you look at if you just made a dent in rehospitalization and reduce the number of people coming into the emergency room. This is the agreement that we made with the federal government and that all the CCOs are committed to doing. Now, albeit this is just on the Medicaid population, so it's 600,000 people out of a state of a much larger population. But the strategy here is to recognize that this healthcare reform effort is not just about Medicaid, it's about changing the whole delivery model. And we are hoping that if we prove up this model, if it meets its quality and cost metrics, that will add to that 600,000 people or 300,000 school teachers and state employees and give them the ability to choose a low-cost, high-quality option on the exchange. If they were to do that, the projected 10-year savings is in the neighborhood of $5 billion. So the delta I showed you was just the Medicaid population. So fixing the healthcare delivery model is a game changer for state finances, and if private sector employers aligned their purchasing with that of the state, it could make Oregon the most business-friendly, competitive state in the nation in terms of reducing the healthcare cost inputs to our businesses.
Going to follow up on that, Harry's question is, do you intend to pursue the coordinated care organizational model in this budget with state employees and
I'm sorry,
school teachers?
I didn't get the first part.
Do you intend to pursue the coordinated care organization model in delivering care to state employees and public teachers?
So we have been having conversations with state employees about this, and again, it's not the CCO, it's the care model. So that the care model could be delivered by some other entity, and we are actually hoping to begin to list that as a choice on the healthcare exchange in 2014. So the answer is yes. And again, we're not mandating anything. We are hoping to offer a proven care model that costs a whole lot less and provides better outcomes on the exchange for public employees, for PEM and OEB.
Going back to your public safety budget, does it account for the fact that a lot of, especially rural counties that are depending on federal subsidies, are talking about returning public safety responsibilities back to the state?
Well, I would say that's a separate issue from the larger challenge of managing our prison population, but it is a very real issue. I've been working on draft legislation with Co-Speaker Hanna and others about what the state would do should one of our rural counties essentially be unable to pay its bills. And I think the two triggers would be obviously public safety or the inability to provide basic human service programs. And we'll have a bill in that will seek to address that. But I think that's a sort of a very important but side issue from managing the larger makeup of the prison population.
If for some reason revenue forecasts change and more money starts flowing into the state than expected, would you advocate setting that aside in a rainy day fund, or do you think there's room for improvement in some of the places in your budget?
Well, we have, well, the short answer is there's room for improvement. I would love to be able to invest more in the TANF program, which I think is very important right now. And certainly in education, in not just K through 12, certainly K through 12, but also community colleges and higher education. I think the thing we have to do is remember that it's taken us a long time and a lot of hard decisions and a lot of pain to move from a budget that was $3.5 billion out of balance to one that's balanced. And we need to be very intentional and very disciplined in not spending every last dime of money that comes in over the transom. We have about $470 million of reserves in this budget, in the rainy day fund and the education stability fund. We should certainly continue to capitalize that based on the nature of the forecast, but we should learn from the past, and we should make thoughtful investments that we know that can be sustained. And if this comes together, we'll have significant opportunities for reinvestment within the budget just by reducing the cost of public safety and health care.
I want to make sure you guys have time to go through the budget. Just one or two more questions.
In the event that the legislature doesn't pass the reforms that some of this funding is based on, PERS and sentencing, what would you cut out of this budget? What would you drop?
Well, that's going to be a decision the legislature is going to have to make. You know, if they have a different configuration, if they don't want to address the question in PERS or the prison reforms, they're looking, all things being equal, at cutting 900 or to 1,000 teachers and making some pretty difficult decisions within the Department of Human Services. I don't believe that will happen. I think there'll be some conversations about it, but at the end of the day, we didn't put this budget together from, the ho-zone. We actually looked really hard at where the revenue options were, and I think this is a very reasoned and balanced approach to a state that still has 8.6 unemployment rate and counties with double-digit unemployment. And it takes discipline and it takes a little political courage to make these choices in the short term that are going to lead us where we want to go in the long term. And I just want to say that this is part of our 10-year budget strategy. This budget might not make much sense if you just look at it as an isolated 2-year exercise, but this is trying to build a foundation and a series of very intentional steps to put this state on a path to an enduring prosperity.
Thank you all very much. We'll be available in the conference room next door with copies of the budget.